Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. On today's show, our guest is Liz Casper. She's an author, artist, and former medical doctor from the Pacific Northwest. She's the author of Brilliant, Beautiful, Bipolar, where she shares her personal journey before, during, and after her diagnosis with bipolar disorder. And then she chronicles her travels and how it affected her. And then her second book is Learning to Heal, regarding her journey as a medical student, a resident physician, a doctor in private practice, and being a cancer patient herself. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to know you, David.
So I was interested in your book, the first one, because the only experience that I have with bipolar disorder is having worked with veterans. I had an individual that had experienced a traumatic experience, and since I don't know much about it, I do some clinical work, but it's not medical. It appeared to me that that had triggered the bipolar experience in her. Is that one of the ways that it can come about, or is it something that people are born with?
No, in fact, from the research that I've done, trauma seems to be quite linked, whether it's early childhood trauma, like I had in a car accident at age 7, where my brother was actually killed, or head trauma in high school sports. Like there's a lot of ways kids can get head trauma, but also, any kind of combat or sexual assault. A traumatic event often precedes a bipolar episode. Um, and then a lot of people get diagnosed. The traditional thing that I was taught as a physician is people get diagnosed in their early 20s. Right now, the range is kind of 20s to 40s, and it's being diagnosed in women in their 50s more commonly now, like I was. I was 54 at the time of diagnosis, and while I had a lot of the traits of hypomania in my life, it always helped me, like not needing a lot of sleep helped me be a better student and doctor and all that. Um, and being hyper creative was helpful in my business endeavors and things. So the warning signs might have been there, but instead I was diagnosed with depression several times in my life over the years before 54, and was put on different drugs like SSRIs and things. And they actually made the sense of my depression worse, and maybe even triggered some more manic type symptoms. So it's kind of hard to diagnose bipolar for a lot of clinicians. And it's also really hard for the person that is diagnosed with that bipolar to accept the diagnosis and take a pill that dampens their creativity, their expansiveness, it's a very alluring thing. It's like people describe it like being on cocaine, but you can't be on cocaine 24/7 and you can't be manic 24/7. So it took some pretty extreme things happening in my life to be diagnosed as bipolar. I was communicating with Steve Jobs through the television. He was guiding me to move to Los Angeles to do, big things. But all of it for me was triggered. I was going through a very stressful time in life, and a lot of stress can also trigger bipolar. And the death of two people that I really liked, Kate Spade, who was a designer of handbags primarily. That was what she was originally known for when I was following her back way back in the day. And then Anthony Bourdain, the guy from the show on TV about, eating all over the world, the chef. And they both died within a week of each other in 2018. And they were really people that I looked up to, and that just snapped. And that my mania came on in the summer of 2018. And yet I wasn't going to admit the defeat of the diagnosis, if you will, until 18 months later, pretty much. And, the disease can leave you with a lot of um, devastation in its wake. You overspend, in my case, overcreate. Think I'm creating, multiple companies of massive value, things like that. And oftentimes, at the end of it, you don't have much to show for yourself. You might have, drained your bank account. You might have broken up a family or had words with families that are hard to take back. So it's an insidious disease. But I took care of as a doctor, I took care of people in the psych ward for many years before my diagnosis of bipolar. And once I was in the hospital myself on the other side, I realized we're really treated like prisoners in psych wards. And mental illness is medical illness, but it's treated vastly differently. And in the psych wards, when you have a mental illness, which in my case was too much dopamine versus someone with, say, Parkinson's disorder is too little dopamine, but they don't go to the psych ward. They go to the medical floor and get great food and get treated, well and everything. But once you're on the psych ward on the inside, you're like, oh, wow, you're treated most of the time like dirt, like prison, and there's not much difference. And I ended up in jail too, twice. It's in the book. um, and so, a lot of mental illness is happening in this world, and it's estimated that 50% of us are going to be diagnosed with a mental health disorder in our lifetime. And we all know that there's a lot more exposure now about the drugs that they're putting everyone on. It's almost like candy. And the fact that none of them have actually been studied longer than usually 6 or 8 in their studies for approval. If we're putting people on them for years and decades. Um, but mental health is medical health. And so until we make some changes in how we treat people with a mental health diagnosis, I think it's kind of an uphill battle. Because when I was in mental health lockdown, what I like to call it, I was in there with a lot of homeless people, a lot of drug addicts withdrawing substances. And that was the exact same way it was when I was in jail. I was in with homeless people, addicts withdrawing from everything under the sun, and bare rooms, no shoelaces because you might, hang your, no hair brushes because you might kill someone with it. I mean, this is the same whether you're in jail or whether you're on the psych ward. And that's got to change because it's an absolute impediment to healing. But through eventually was hospitalized in Los Angeles at UCLA, where my healing really began. And then I ended up in Malibu at a rehab center there, and ended up, that's where book number one ends, where I completed that healing in California, then went back up to the Pacific Northwest, where my mom had just her hip, got diagnosed with colon cancer, and then began the whole journey in the during COVID. So cancer, chemo, and COVID was really fun. And so book number two, Learning to Heal, is about my journey from growing up in a medical family where I was the fourth generation physician and the only female in the family. So I chronicle what it's like to go through medical school. Granted, this is back in the early 90s, but transitioning through becoming, the little baby doc, the junior, resident doctor, then in my own private practice, which I had for 19 years, and then cancer patient myself. I'm not only highlighting what it's like to be in that position of learning how to heal someone or save someone, but kind of we treated people back then. The thing that's really interesting that's hard to explain is how much medicine has changed so much in the last 30 years, um, 35 since I started, I think it was. And um, the practice of medicine is just completely changed. Like in my book, I highlight several diseases for which people were hospitalized, and the only thing we did was change their diet. Very strict diet, not very palatable in some cases, but very strict for the nutrients and the way that it the body, and the patients were healed and taken off of every drug imaginable. So those kinds of things you don't hear about very much anymore. And if you tried to practice that type of medicine today, you'd probably lose your license. But there's a lot of wisdom that you can actually put practice in your own life for those diseases that I highlight. Every chapter highlights another disease. So it's an education as well as a storytelling what it's like to be a female physician. Even today, it's pretty shocking. Women make significantly less than men in the medical workforce, and it adds up to $2 million per career, man versus woman, for the exact same job. So it's interesting.
Well, there's so many things I want to discuss, but you brought up nutrition. I stopped at a convenience store and tried to buy some candy, and I usually look at the labels because I have a lot of food sensitivities. And one of the things they had put on this coconut product was chloride dioxide or something like that. And it says that they use it for sunblock lotion, and that it was banned in Europe, but it was put on the coconut candy to brighten it. And so, have you been disappointed with um, Make America Healthy Again and all that uh, craziness that has not panned out? Because I was a big supporter of RFK when it came down to some of his the things that he campaigned on, and then now I haven't seen any changes, and it seems like very quickly it devolved back to just a raw diet or tons of protein or something like that. Nothing that I think is helpful.
Yeah, without picking on him in particular, I was quite concerned about the blanket um, pass that was given to the makers of his fate, which is terribly toxic to humans, and it's all over our food. And that's from, I think, Bayer now. Bayer bought Monsanto,
Mhm.
and Monsanto makes Roundup, which is
Correct.
glyphosate. Glyphosate. Um, things like that, huge, sweeping, immunity to someone that's just to a corporation that's poisoning us. Um, I thought that RFK got the food dyes, he's taking those out. That I don't know what he's actually gotten passed or not passed. What frustrates you the most? I mean, if um, there's no doubt that we're being poisoned by our food.
He met with Kraft and Heinz and all the condiment people, and it seemed like they bribed him or convinced him not to move forward with getting rid of all the artificial stuff. And that was very disappointing because in Canada, all that stuff is banned, and they Fruit Loops and things like that, they're done with fruit colors versus artificial ones. And then they've
Right.
been lobbying to call everything natural and everything, just these generic terms that don't mean anything. And they're putting a lot of stuff that it is, unhealthy. So I just feel that he was neutered by the policy analysts and the lobbying firms.
Lobbies.
So, and that's the problem, is that people only win elections if they have enough supporters. And if those big corporations start boycotting you or giving money to the other candidate, then you're out of the race. So, if we could get money out of politics, then things would be different. But to go back to bipolar and mental health, uh, all I could think of when you were talking about the way that people are treated in the psych ward, I was thinking about a lot of the personalities and people that we judge. You know how it's very common in all circles now to say that guy's a narcissist, or that guy is a someone who's antisocial or something like that, without trying to look into how did they get there, or who are we to diagnose someone if there's so many things that have to be taken into consideration. So, not to be offensive to people who are on any type of spectrum, but do you think that cult leaders and criminals might have some type of diagnoses, and because they haven't been treated, because they don't have access to mental health, that they have used self-soothing either through violence, drugs, alcohol, or manipulating others to get themselves to a better place or to get their needs met? That's something that has just come across for me working with children, that is easy for parents to get very frustrated and to write their kids off, when a lot of times the reason that they might be acting out or doing things that are self-destructive is because they have not been given the resources they might need.
Yeah, I think with the rise of social media, and I predicted this back in 2010 at a conference, and everyone thought I was crazy. I was like, this is just going to explode narcissism because you're putting yourself, most part, or your work product, maybe it's photography, maybe it's art, whatever, you're putting yourself out there for likes. And, um, it becomes, well, how many likes? And then it's how fast are you getting the likes? And if you're a business, then that puts you in the position of having to pay for those likes because you're going to, advertise. So, it's this vicious cycle. And I can't imagine raising children in this environment right now where the whole world is narcissistic. you know it's become this self-eating machine. And it's not taking us anywhere good. And these kids are their role models are these factitious people living factitious lives, that we put them on pedestals, whether they're sports heroes or television reality stars. It doesn't matter. It's all narcissistic. So um, I'm not sure if I answered your specific question, but I think that narcissism is a very big problem. And that's an axis 2 diagnosis in the medical literature. Like, I have an axis 1 diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Axis 2 diagnoses are personality disorders. So they're narcissism, histrionic, borderline. I'm personally seeing a massive rise in borderline personality disorder. Technically, the axis 2 diagnoses like narcissism and borderline, those are more nurture, people say, than nature. That we nurture people into narcissism. I do think that there's family traits. I don't know if they're genetic, but I certainly see family traits of narcissism. And supposedly mine is hereditary. When I had a consultation once with a very famous German psychiatrist, I was in hospital in Miami, and his first question to me was, "Which one of your parents has bipolar?" And I said, "Neither." And he said, "Well, which one of your kids has it?" And I said, "Neither." So apparently, I'm an anomaly because apparently bipolar is very genetic, but no one in my family has it. Although I've often said I feel like I grew up in a blender. You can make of that what you will, but it was quite a dramatic childhood. So,
Well, the reason that I ask about the way the society handles, I hate to use the word abnormal behavior, is that in Latin America, where I'm from, um, people are very judgmental. So if I remember my aunt was having some type of episode, we don't know if it was related to her having some type of perimenopause or was so pressured by her husband and her kids that I remember her running around naked in the street and my family not knowing what to do, and my mom, who's very spiritual, almost trying to do like an exorcism on her and trying
mhm.
to calm her down. And all that people did was judge her and mistreat her and assume the worst. And she ended up getting psychological help, but I wonder how many people have never had access to care and have found ways to self-regulate. When I worked with veterans, a lot of the ways that they dealt with their trauma was through alcoholism and drugs. And we know that all medicine stems from chemicals and things that change your chemical makeup. Have you experienced that when people don't have access to counseling, to psychiatric help, they end up finding their own ways of dealing with it, but a lot of it is around shame and guilt because society does not support them.
Yes, without a doubt. I've spent a lot of time during my manic time with homeless people in Los Angeles. And a lot of the stuff that they talk about, these crazies in on the streets are actually quite clairvoyant and they know what's going on. For example, in my book, The Brilliant, Beautiful Bipolar, which my mother named, not me. I like the alliteration, so I stuck with it. Um, I was in love with this essentially a homeless guy in Malibu. And no, I forgot what I was saying.
Well, about
Oh,
them having access to an understanding that most of us wouldn't.
for example, anytime that we'd go to a place that had, electronics, he would unplug them all and he'd cover them all with um, towels and things because he felt that the TVs were recording us, everything was recording us. So, well, guess what? He's right. They just didn't admit it back then. So, and some of these schizophrenic people that I've met in psych wards that I've been in, they know what's going on, man. They're locked up because people think they're crazy because they really know what's going on in the world. And so it's an interesting balance. You and also feel like the psychiatric system today as we know it, you can't just have an episode and then learn how to get through it and not have it again. You're put into this system where you're always sick, you're always labeled, so you do have that shame about your diagnosis. Bipolar people, I've been told again by this German psychiatrist in Miami that most of our entertainers are bipolar. Um, that's what goes along with this hyper creativity. I was watching a show the other day on bipolar, and it was going through all the famous actors that have been diagnosed as bipolar, and it was actually quite illuminating. I was like, wow, I didn't know that person was, and that person, that, so it's quite common because when you're in that, so bipolar has stages. There's a stage where you're balanced, and for me, that feels like being sharp as a spoon. It's like I feel completely dull. And then there's the hypomania stage, which is kind of a crescendo. It starts like I'm sure it's just like having a few lines of cocaine, and then you keep going and you keep going and you going, and then it's just like your motor. It's all gas, no brake. Once you start getting into that mania stage, and that's when the wheels start falling off. You make stupid decisions. I've made many. I highlight them in the first book. Not all of them, but there's just innumerable stupid decisions that you make. And in my case, mania shows up where I think thing is a good idea. Every idea I want to pursue is such a good idea. And you're smart and you have access to funds. You create companies and you do not stupid, but just it's just like go 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 go. And it's all gas. Then eventually the brakes come on, and you end up in the hospital, jail, or dead. So that's the life of a manic depressive.
And have you ever met or have undergone some type of family intervention where people or friends who cared about you sat you down and told you, "Hey, you're not heading in the right direction. The way that you are dealing with life is over the top." Was that one of the ways that you came to terms with it?
Yeah, my oldest son, has been that person, for me, throughout the years. It's been 8 years now since diagnosis. Uh, and then when I'm doing well, for a long time, he would ask me kind of in a threatening, not threatening, but a nice manner, are you taking your meds? And that used to always really offend me and get me upset. Now it doesn't. I understand he's asking out of a good place. But yeah, it was interesting. I was listening to someone else talk about their bipolar, and she said verbatim what I would say, which is a change in sleeping and eating habits is a good barometer. So for manic depressives, not needing food is a sign of getting into mania. So traditionally, if I'm manic, I'm losing weight and not sleeping. Very erratic sleep schedules. And so those are triggers, I guess, or they're symptoms. Maybe triggers are really just kind of, well, for example, I had my experience living in Los Angeles in 2018, 2019, having all this bipolar experience. And then I wrote the book and published that in 2025, but had it written in 2024. And then in January of 2025, literally almost every place I wrote about in my book burned to the ground in the fires of Malibu and Los Angeles last year in 2025. Set me off again. So it was so traumatic that just literally place after place after place watched go up in flames that I was just like, I couldn't handle it. So that set me off. So yeah, I think you and your friend and the whole question of trauma, and then you mentioned your friend in your country that had an episode. It makes you wonder what it was, and it's hard because you can be stigmatized and you can lose family and friends.
The next question was this whole thing that when it rains, it pours. You so you have your diagnoses, you have places where you have had different experiences burned down, and then the cancer diagnoses. Um, how do you manage all these multiple crises all at once? It breaks my heart when I meet families who are going through so many things.
Yeah, it was a lot to have. I finally accepted the diagnosis of bipolar at UCLA. And then, like I said, I went to Malibu to a place of healing for a month. And then, literally in Malibu, I started to have the symptoms of what ended up being colon cancer. And then I came back to the Pacific Northwest and ended up within 48 hours in the hospital being prepped for colon cancer. So it was just like boom, 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 boom. And then COVID, literally the same exact month that I started chemo, was the first lockdown. So my business is all closed in Seattle. There was nothing I needed to do, and um, so it was harsh because I had to go to chemo all alone. My mom or family, no one could go with me because of COVID, but I was at home dealing with the chemo. And I was at home thinking I was going to die. Um, I had a death experience that changed me forever. And I write about that in my book about under the cancer section. But basically, what taught me is that this is a game. It is a simulation. It's a game. And the game is this time around all about love. And there's only two emotions, love and fear. And fear is everything else, you know. Anything bad comes out of fear. So love is really where it's at, and you have to learn how to yourself. And when you've been given a mental health diagnosis, it can be challenging, you know, and you feel like it's a scarlet letter on your forehead. B for bipolar or Boston.
And my wife is in the middle of writing a memoir, and part of it was being vulnerable in the eyes of strangers. Also, I was worried about how she was going to portray me in the book because we have a lot of disagreements and stuff like that. How is the process of pouring yourself into the book and out there for you? Is it a healing thing, or is it an expose to help other people who might be going through the same thing, or both?
It's healing for sure. For me, with the first book on bipolar, it was very triggering. Um, I went through writing about it. It was hard. Because in order to really, I'm told that I write in such a way that you get really inside the person's head, which is good. That's what I want. But in order to do that, I had to go back inside my head and relive those experiences. And they were traumatic. You know, waking up on a jail cell floor is traumatic after you've been roofied by a billionaire that you know. So it's, uh, healing, it's hard, but I think it's important. I read a lot of books on bipolar, which there aren't a ton coming from the person's perspective, that rather than from the other side, the doctor's side. And I don't find I get inside people's heads. They're not telling me what they feel, what they see, you know. I was being led by a dead person, Steve Jobs. He was my right hand guy, and he was visually on my screen, and my TV's talking to me. So, so at some point, you have to laugh because when you're going through it, it couldn't be more real. It's just bizarre what you're. body can do. So,
And I'm a big entertainment person, movies, comic books, and Star Trek and stuff like that. So, why celebrities? Like you mentioned, being hurt by the death of two celebrities, and then having Steve Jobs as your guide. Um, was there also people that you knew in your life that were appearing to you or having communication with you, or is it mostly celebrity driven because of your fascination with them?
yeah, it's a good point. I'd always admired Steve. Had a brush with him in the 80s in Palo Alto. And he had gone to college at the same time as I had. So I felt like I had a relationship with him. He wasn't a complete stranger to me. I had followed him over the years in his business philosophy, read his autobiography. So, you know, it, I admire his aesthetic. I'm a big Apple fan, always was with him. Um, so being, yeah, you can, when you're manic, for sure, get really obsessed with celebrity, if you will. I think it's just largely because it's what you see in the media. Um, did that answer your question?
Sure, and again, not to overemphasize that some of the people who stalk celebrities or who have hurt celebrities had like a romantic relationship with them without even knowing them, or thought that they were closer to them than they were. Um, do you think that that's maybe that's one of the reasons that people don't talk about some of these challenges because it is too close to home. It makes you feel vulnerable to think that someone might be experiencing you in a way that you are not experiencing them, and that they're in their mind they're having fantasies about you or something like that. That is like a hidden thing about mental illness that people find scary or find it uncomfortable to think in those terms.
I'm not really sure how to answer that. My book, the Bipolar book, has a lot of contemporary references to celebrities because I was down in LA. And the reason why I went to LA is because Steve told me I needed to save celebrities, two in particular. So there's references like that, but I've never been like a groupie or someone that's obsessed with celebrity. I see it for what it is. Um, I think that I just consider everything to be a learning experience. Um, Even manic, I learned something by going through it. I'm not happy to have this diagnosis, but I'm starting to write book number 3, and I'm contemplating calling it The Gift of Bipolar because you do have a heightened sense of senses, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentient, at least I do. And so knowing that that's an untapped gift that I have now, when I have a quote unquote coincidence or something really lines up that I know it's because of a extra skill, if you will, I no longer get either super excited or freaked out or upset. I just like, oh, okay, I observe it and I'm glad that I have it. Um, because I've always had the ability to foresee big events in the world, some with real precision, some not so precise. But so being able to manage the gift of bipolar without getting manic is my challenge, and probably everybody's.
So there's a book called The Gift of Autism by Tiffany Simpson, and then we interviewed um, our friend from Canada who wrote a book called Autism on Purpose or something like that. And what it is that destigmatizing mental health and conditions that people live full lives and that people can thrive in. Everybody, like you said, everybody can learn from it. That if you have a good team of supporters, kids with autism can make it very far in life. Um, and we found that very heartwarming because they had gone through the fires of Canada and they had everything set up for their child who needed a lot of support, and then now they're dealing with the trauma of the forest fires. So back to the amount of resources, do you feel that the state that you're in right now has enough mental health availability for counseling and psychiatric help? Because here in Texas is very limited and people sometimes they have to change states to be able to get the help they need. Uh, what advocacy or what can you pinpoint as a need that is not being met by society when it comes down to mental health?
There's this triage that occurs with the unhoused. You have to decide, do they need to go to jail or to the hospital? And if they go to the hospital, they're all lumped together as they are in the jail. But in the hospital, they're there to get a medical need met. And so until we can adequately figure out a way to have people that are really healing from a mental, like say a psychotic break, if you're a schizophrenic, or a bipolar manic episode, if you're bipolar, or depression so severe you want to kill yourself, that kind of thing. For me, it didn't make a lot of sense to put me in the same groups sitting right next to the homeless guy that has no desire to be there, but he's too sick to go to jail. Um, and so every state is underfunded. And, when you learn of all the fraud that they're finding in every state and almost every department, the Medicare fraud, the Medicaid fraud, um, and you realize that, perhaps even trillions by the time we're done with all the states being wasted on fraud, and we can't deal with the mental health crisis. A lot of people are just straight up drug and alcohol addicts. Then they act like they have a mental illness when they're withdrawing, but they're not mentally ill. They're just addicted to drugs and alcohol. Well, putting them in the same exact milieu as someone that's trying to recover from a psychiatric illness, and maybe like me, they're going to go back into the medical world versus someone that doesn't even have a house to call home. It's just a really flawed system. And a lot of states, get millions of dollars of funding and they create maybe one or two new beds, not facilities, beds for a new person to come into. It's just the amount of waste, and I don't know how we're going to fix it, if you will, under the current medical system, which is just broken beyond repair. I read that 40 some CEOs of healthcare companies are billionaires now. It's just like, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is just unbelievable. It
And
really is.
what is the role of spirituality in your healing journey?
Well, when I've been manic, I've been incredibly spiritual. And what's interesting is it's led to some really good experiences. And then, yet, when you're in that mode, of being very open, you also can bring in negative entities and have a really bad experience. And I've had some of those. I've written about a couple of them, not a lot. Um, so I'm very, very spiritual. And as I said, I wrote about my near death experience in book two and feel that I have come face to face with God. Um, no longer fear going to the other side. I realize this is literally a simulation of biology. You know, the universe is digital, and God is most likely the main to the entire universe, universes, whatever. So we're here to enjoy this meat sack and to enjoy every moment. Literally, I've seen my journey to help those around me not stress so much about the things that don't matter. I live a pretty stress free life now. I sold my medical practice in 23, and then now I spend my time doing art and writing and taking care of family. So I'm extremely spiritual because I know that this is a spiritual war that we're in against good and evil. Um, we have to become a society that protects our children. We have to. We have to stop medicating our children with all these SSRIs. There's just so many changes to take place in our society. I think if you lack a spiritual practice, you're really missing out on some joy that you could have in your life besides the day to day grind. You know, it is a grind, it's meant to be. And mental illness just makes it much more challenging. Um, and I'm very lucky, you know, I started life as a professional and made it through with still some friendships intact, my family intact. Not that we didn't go through hell and back, but you know, we've made it to the other side. And for me, spirituality is just literally part of my day, all day, every day. I literally talk to God, um, consider him or her, you know, hey, you're here, let's talk. So I'm very spiritual.
What is the problem with SSRIs in kids?
Well, we're having a storm with thunder and lightning. You may hear it. Um, to the best of my knowledge, the SSRI studies have been done just for very short periods of time, 6 or 8 weeks. They don't look at term. And there's also not conclusive evidence showing that SRIs play any role. They don't know the mechanism of action in depression. And so it's become an epidemic society to give children these drugs. And I don't have young children, so I haven't looked into have they actually done the FDA studies in children or an off-label use. For example, any child going through hormone therapy, uh, uh, what do they call that? Gender affirming care. Those drugs are approved for children and they're being used off label in children. So, something that I don't think they do a good job of educating people about. They're not meant for children. So, SSRIs, whether they've been tested in children or not, I doubt they've been tested long term. And they alter the brain massively, children. And I think it's just a wise decision to be very cautious in medicating kids. You know, they even marijuana, they say they shouldn't have till they're older because of their developing brain. Well, I don't think a pharmaceutical is any different than marijuana, which is a plant-based medicine. I think that you should uh, be very judicious. I mean, when you're pregnant as a woman, they want you to ask about everything that you expose a fetus to. But then somehow when they come out, they just get jabbed and medicated. And I could talk all night about this.
But have you been discriminated or shoved aside for your unique perspective on this? Because everywhere you go, they say that in small quantities, if it's done, you know, you when it's needed versus just zombing out kids, if kids actually have issues. So do you not trust the judgment of other doctors, or is it a whole systemic thing that is becoming a problem and people like you don't have the right to speak their mind or to treat their patients in different ways?
Well, I haven't practiced medicine since 2013. Um, so I've never had to prescribe those drugs to kids. Um, and for example, something like Xanax, I never prescribed because I thought it was a terrible drug. Um, I think that kids have a tough road to climb. 30% of children are now obese, not overweight, obese. That's like alarming. Um, Schools are getting rid of reading, writing, and math because it's racist. So kids no longer have things to strive for in life. So they're eating toxic food, processed food, lunches where ketchup is a vegetable and ketchup's just red high fructose corn syrup. It's uh, it's a toxic milieu, and I think that we have to limit the amount of toxins that we can for kids. And I doctors prescribing things very generously. And like I said, my concern now that I know it is that they don't study these things long term. And so I don't know many kids that go on meds for 6 to 8 weeks and then they come off. That's another whole thing. I've dealt with this personally, but tapering off of these meds or tapering down has to be done extremely slowly, because if you rapidly discontinue any psychiatric drug, there's incredible bounce back side effects that can be debilitating, almost worse than what they might have started with. So um, that's all. I would say I'm a medication minimalist, and that if I were practicing medicine today, that might make me less mainstream, but still probably within mainstream. I see my friends, their doctors are trying to get them off meds, not putting them on more, which I think is a good way to go. I really do. Everything has side effects.
And not to bring it up back to RFK, but that's what he was saying about the COVID vaccine and other vaccines that haven't been vetted properly, or that the FDA has become very chummy with the corporations, giving them a carte blanche when it comes down to being able to put them out in the market. So I see what you're saying. For people with serious diagnoses, do you think that the meds that are available right now do have a positive effect, or should they use alternative medicine as well?
Well, I think you should always use alternative medicine as well. a good allopathic doctor, like I was, a medical doctor, not a doctor of chiropractic or a naturopathic doctor, but an allopathic doctor should work with an alternative practitioner to, support the patient. I'm seeing a lot of stuff online about people going through with traditional protocols, like for chemotherapy and such, and then they're also adding, you know, adjunctive is what we call it, or alternative medicine to it. Um, I think there's just so many different circumstances um, that it's hard to give you a blanket statement about the condition of our medical prescribing. Um, I think that doctors can be overwhelmed and they just want to have a solution, a quick solution, and writing that prescription for Ritalin or Xanax or that antibiotic that they don't need, but they're going to insist on a prescription. I think doctors can give in to a lot of pressure for medications that um, there might be alternatives. For example, in my second book, Learning to Heal, I discuss working with a family physician who treated a boy with ADHD with diet alone. And it took a month of weekly visits of putting a child on a no sugar ketogenic diet, which was very hard for a 7-year-old. Loved sugar, but it took a month. But a month later, he was a new kid and he could articulate that he felt better. And so that kind of medicine is very hard to practice nowadays. That was 30 years ago that I was in that situation. And today, I think you would find it hard to parent that would bring their child back 4 times in a month, change their entire diet. I mean, really tough for a kid and for a parent. So, but I think that the point should be made and hopefully well taken in the book. Every time I discuss a disease and how we treated it back then, I'm trying to teach people that there are ways to modify behavior without drugs. But that's not a theme in the book, but I have a few stories that highlight that. So you're someone with ADHD, or you have a kid with ADHD, and you read my book and you realize that a ketogenic diet, a true ketogenic diet, could heal your child from this affliction. I wouldn't even call it a disease many times. I would just call it an affliction. Um, but it takes dedication, it takes education, it takes, for a parent, oftentimes putting up a lot of resistance from the child. They don't want to do it. They want their sugar, or they want this, or they want that. So
We're gonna have to leave it there. We want to thank Liz Casper for joining us. You can see more of her information on lizcasper.com, and maybe we'll have you again in the future to share more about your experience.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Same here.